Today's video is going to cover factor markets, which is the information in section 13. First of all, let's define what a factor market is. A factor market is a market where companies are going to buy either the factors of production or those resources that a company would need in order to produce their goods and or services. There are two very important things to realize regarding factor markets. One, the factors of production generally are known to have a derived demand, meaning that the demand for the factor of production is derived from the demand for the output being produced. Today, because of the coronavirus, we see a very high level of unemployment. The largest reason for that unemployment is to the lack of demand that the coronavirus has caused in the markets. A second important item regarding the factor market is that they will create the major source of incomes for individual. Each factor of production will have a factor price. For land, people pay rent. For labor, people pay wages. For capital, such as financial capital, people will pay interest. And the management or the entrepreneurship will be paid through the profits of the firm. This next slide demonstrates the relationship between the production function and the marginal product of labor. You will see the table to the left where there is a list of laborers, a list of the total quantity of goods that is produced, and then finally what the marginal product of labor is per worker. Looking at the total product curve will be the curve that will result from the production function. One worker will provide 19 goods. Two workers will produce 36 goods, and so on. You will also see that the marginal product of labor will be downward sloping. And when you look at the last column of marginal product, you will see that as we add workers to the production process, the marginal product per worker will diminish, therefore demonstrating diminishing marginal product. When looking at the marginal product of labor curve, you will notice that the points are all at the midpoint, demonstrating the change in total product when we add a laborer to the production process. One very important fact that you need to realize is that the demand curve for labor is the MRPL curve. MRPL stands for the marginal revenue product of labor. It is also referred to as the VMPL, which is the value of the marginal product of labor. The demand curve illustrates that at a higher level of wages, less workers would be hired. As the wage rate starts to fall, a larger number of workers would then be demanded due to the cost of production. The most important thing to remember is that the demand curve for labor represents the marginal revenue product of labor. The marginal revenue product of labor is taking the marginal product per worker and multiplying it by the price that you are able to charge for the good that is being produced. Here we see a diagram where we illustrate a firm in a perfectly competitive market. So when there is a question regarding a perfectly competitive market for labor, this would be the diagram that you would use. On the left-hand side, we have the labor market, the supply of laborers, and the demand for laborers. In this market, the type of labor is pretty identical. Generally, you would have unskilled work as an example of this, and the labor market will create a wage. The worker is a wage taker, and therefore, whatever the wage is for the market, that represents the supply curve in the market for the single firm. The demand curve, as we mentioned before, will illustrate the marginal revenue product of labor. A firm should hire the amount of employees where the MRPL intersects the supply curve, which is also referred to as the marginal factor cost. In this diagram, you will notice that the first worker will be hired because the marginal revenue product of labor is greater than the cost. The second worker will also be hired because their marginal revenue product of labor is also above the market factor cost. We will hire up to the point where the marginal factor cost equals the MRPL. Once we go to the fourth worker and the fifth worker, we will notice that the marginal factor cost is greater than the MRPL. Therefore, we would not hire the fourth or fifth worker. There are three major reasons of why the demand for labor would shift. First of all is the changes in demand for the product. That goes back to the idea of labor having a derived demand for the good. So laborers will increase demand when there is an increase in demand for the good that they are producing. Secondly, changes in productivity. When technology allows a worker to produce more goods, they become more valuable. Therefore, the demand for labor would increase. The last reason is the changes in the prices of other resources. One could be substitute resources, or two, complementary resources. In the examples, they ask what happens to the demand for assembly line workers if the price of robots falls. If the price of robots falls, there will be less demand for the assembly line worker. In the second example, what would happen to the demand for nails if the price of lumber increased significantly? If lumber prices go up, there would be less demand for lumber, therefore less demand for nails. When we talk about the factor markets, we talk about a perfectly competitive market, and now we will talk about a monopsony. We've talked about monopsonies before when we introduced monopolies. A monopsony will be where there is one firm that is able to manipulate the labor market. In a sense, they will be the single buyer of the factors of production. Here, we will find that firms have the ability to make the wages that are in their best interest. Here we see a graph that illustrates the behavior of a monopsony. One question would read, at what quantity would be the socially efficient quantity? And again, that is where supply equals demand. Therefore, we would find QSE as the socially efficient quantity of workers and the wage that would be set at that point. Because a monopsony does not have competition, they are going to decide on the number of workers where the marginal cost curve, which is the supply curve for the firm, intersects the demand for workers. So the QE would represent the quantity that the firm would hire. And at that quantity, this would be the wage that workers would work for. Therefore, we could see that the wage being set by the firm is below the socially efficient wage, and the number of workers hired will also be lower than the socially efficient quantity of workers, and thereby the monopsony would create the area of dead weight loss. I hope this video helped. Again, anytime you have any questions at all, please feel free to email me. And once again, on Tuesday and Thursday at 10 o'clock, I will have a Shobi chat for you to join me. Have a great day.